Miracy.
I had to learn the language of feedback. So I think one of the biggest lessons in my leadership journey is I needed to learn that things aren't personal. Some things are personal, but oftentimes it's more important to take the opportunity to self-reflect and improve than it is to blame. And so really what we try to do is create consistency around being able to give and receive feedback within Burning Man.
I'm Sharon Richmond, and this is To Lead is Human. For nearly 40 years, I've run a business called Leading Large. I coach C-level executives to have greater impact, clarify their priorities, energize their organizations, adapt their personal behaviors, and through this, build cultures of accountability and respect. My guest today is Marnee Benson, Director of Government Affairs at the Burning Man Project. Marnee leads high-stakes negotiations for one of the most complex event permits in the U.S. She advocates for Burning Man at every level of government, and she helps steer strategic and environmental priorities for the organization. With over 2 decades of experience in both fieldwork and policy, Marnee brings a uniquely human-centered approach to leadership in high-pressure, heavily regulated environments. For a little context, Burning Man's signature and most famous event is Black Rock City, which creates a pop-up week-long festival. I think of around 70,000 people in the Nevada desert. Because it is so remote and isolated, every logistical aspect of the event, from amenities to public safety to accommodations, must be built from scratch each year and then removed with zero impact on the location and environment. It is a simply astonishing feat, and it is only one of many global aspects of the Burning Man Project. So Marnee, thank you so much for making time to talk today. I'm so grateful you could join me and share some of your leadership journey. What else should people know about the organization briefly?
Burning Man Project is a nonprofit, and our event in Black Rock City in the northern Nevada desert, it takes place in a national conservation area and typically sees a population of between 70,000 and 80,000 people each year.
Amazing. And they all show up on the same day?
The people that show up earliest are our staff and volunteers who come in and build the infrastructure for Black Rock City. They really set the stage. And then we have theme camps and mutant vehicles and art projects and artists coming in and really bringing the energy and the spectacle to Black Rock City. And typically the event lasts for 8 days. People can stay as long as they want, but they do have to leave on Labor Day.
Aha. So it happens end of August?
Yes.
Okay. So given we've got some backdrop about Burning Man, and let's start by just tell me a little bit about your leadership philosophy. How do you think about leadership and what matters to you in how you lead and how you're seen as a leader?
I like to ask questions that cause me and others to see things differently and consider multiple angles. I think it's worth the extra effort to strive to understand other people's perspectives. I'm big into alignment and consensus. I believe in strong, informed decision-making and inviting people into the process. I give great context. I think clear and inclusive communications are a cornerstone of my leadership. I really like solving problems and having good systems in place. I think humor is imperative. It keeps things real and keeps us connected. It's especially grounding when things become tense or complicated, which happens at Burning Man. And as a leader of teams, I enjoy matching people to their skills and passions and expanding horizons. One of my favorite opportunities as a leader is elevating people.
Lovely. So how did you first get introduced to Burning Man as an organization?
I first attended the Black Rock City event in 2001 and continued going because I had such a transformative experience that first year in seeing the world and my place in the world in a different way. And then in 2007, the art theme of the event was called The Green Man. And I had just finished up 2 master's degrees, one in environmental science and one in environmental policy. And I was hired to write about the building of Black Rock City during this environmentally themed year. Then in 2009, I started a leadership role in Black Rock Solar, which was for 10 years a nonprofit organization doing work in renewable energy policy and project development for other nonprofits and tribes in hospitals and schools.
So you've been in this role of kind of helping create alignment with government oversight, with government agencies.
Yeah, at Black Rock Solar, I learned a lot about working with policymakers, which had been my goal in graduate school. And I really thrived in building consensus and bringing stakeholders together, even stakeholders with differing viewpoints and goals and opinions. I like doing that as a leader. And at Burning Man, in government relations, we find ourselves needing to collaborate with our government partners. And sometimes those partners want to be collaborative and sometimes they don't. And so we have challenges in different spaces during different years.
Throughout this conversation, I'm going to be thinking in parallel about how the same principles apply in all organizations. And so, in a sense, what you're saying, you have a unique skill at. I think a lot of people want to know, how do you do this? How do you bring together these people with disparate views and help create alignment and perspective while, I'm going to assume, respecting the differences between people's positions or organizations' positions?
I think that's so important. One of the guiding principles at Burning Man and in our community is radical inclusion. And it's an invitation for people to be involved. And I like to carry that philosophy through into the work of government affairs and to try to understand the different needs and goals and value systems at play. Because Burning Man is a very creative community and a creative organization, and government agencies can oftentimes be very rigid and have different approach. So for me and my department and our work, it's frequently very interesting to see that in play and to try to hold space for all the different sides.
So you started with Burning Man as a participant and then grew through a variety of roles into this director position. How has your leadership changed? Or what have you been learning over these last 10, 12 years about how to lead effectively in such a unique organization?
One of the things I deeply appreciate about Burning Man is that our organization sees each individual as a leader. We nurture leadership internally, and it really shows in the way that we interact with each other. And I think some of my growth has come from that opportunity to really shine and to learn where I'm thriving and where I have blind spots. And so I know that over the past 10 years, I have learned a lot about what's effective in my leadership and what hasn't been effective. And I've had the opportunity to course correct.
If you're willing, tell us a little bit about what you found effective, where you think it wasn't, and how did you manage to move past the less effective things?
Yeah, I think that when I first started in my career at Burning Man, I wasn't as good of a listener, and I had a little bit of a laser focus on my own priorities and my own work. And I've learned to really do some active listening and take into consideration the different directions and different goals that people have. And so, at Burning Man especially, we have so many different departments. The art department is making all that beautiful art at Burning Man happen. There are people focused on our broader mission. We have different program areas like Burners Without Borders. There are environmental priorities. There is a very large tech department that helps the whole thing go forward. And there's the legal team. And there's so many different divisions and areas that what I love about the work that I do is I've gotten insight into what makes people tick and those different departmental priorities. And so I think that part of my journey has been taking that into consideration as we move forward and getting alignment so the ship is being steered in the same direction.
And so what kind of expectations did you have stepping into this formal governmental affairs role? And what have you found unexpected about the reality of this leadership role?
Part of what I didn't anticipate was the complexity of the role and of our department. The Burning Man event depends on our ability to be permitted and to receive the permissions and agreements that we need in place with our different agency partners. And The work that I do includes, for example, working with the Federal Aviation Administration to make sure that we can build and operate our airport. We work with the State of Nevada Division of Public and Behavioral Health to ensure that our on-site hospital facility and ambulance service and medical personnel are licensed and can operate this incredible facility out in the middle of the desert. I was surprised to learn at the complex jurisdictional nature of law enforcement and how we work with, for example, the Nevada State Police, the Pyramid Lake Police Department, the Pershing County Sheriff's Office, the Washoe County Sheriff's Office, and different jurisdictions on and off the playa where the event takes place. And so I think that complexity was surprising as I grew into this role and also keeps things interesting.
So, how has the role changed over the time you've been in it, given changes in our world around us?
One factor that's interesting and might not be obvious to people who aren't thinking about the behind the scenes is that a lot of our process depends on, for example, the presidential administration and the priorities that are set there, because our primary permit is with the Bureau of Land Management, which is under the Department of Interior. And so our special recreation permit depends on our access to them and our coordination with them. And this year in particular, our partnership with them has been fantastic. And that really plays into the public health and safety that we're responsible for.
So, just for a sense of scale, how many employees, how many people work year-round for the Burning Man project?
About 150 to 160 full-time year-round staff members.
And during the build-up to the event, and then at the event, how much does it expand? And what percent are employees versus volunteers?
Currently, as we're speaking, there are a couple hundred people out on our event site building the infrastructure. So it expands seasonally into hundreds of employees and staff members and thousands of volunteers.
And we're speaking, what, like 2-3 weeks before the event right now?
Yes.
Roughly. So if you think about it, now we've got twice as many people on the playa building the infrastructure. Is that including your full-time staff?
Many of our full-time staff are still in office or transitioning out to the playa, but many of them are out there right now managing teams and ensuring that the structures and systems that need to be built are getting built.
And so this sounds like something very complex to manage.
It is. I have such respect for our event operations teams. There are about 40 to 45 departments within event operations. We have our own Department of Public Works. There are individuals and teams responsible for pivotal parts of the operation that have earned the respect of all of our colleagues and the participants who show up and bring such expertise over the course of years to be able to make this pop-up ephemeral city happen each year and then disappear without a trace.
It's just mind-boggling to even try to picture what it would look like, although I have seen photos, lots of beautiful photos, but I haven't been myself. So as you're scaling up, where do all the volunteers come from?
The volunteers come from all over the world. I led a greenhouse gas emissions inventory during COVID. I examined the emissions from Burning Man in 2019, and we discovered that our participants and our volunteers come from 5,500 cities from across the world. So it's a fun question to think about where the volunteers come from, because the volunteers are the participants. Everyone is contributing to making Black Rock City happen. So people are finding their niche and, for example, volunteering for our gate perimeter and exodus team, or volunteering for community services, or for our emergency services. There are a team of Black Rock Rangers, about 800 of them, that they go around the event site 24 hours a day, just being available to the community and in service to our community. So depending on the nature of your volunteerism, you're bound to find a place and a tribe, as it were, of people to come together with.
So it almost seems like a subset of the people that attend come to help build the event, to help be part of making it happen.
You're right, Sharon, because there's identity in that. There's identity in bringing a gift to create something that's bigger than the individual. And again, one of our principles, our shared principles that I love, is gifting. And that can take many forms. And for a lot of people, that is the volunteer time that they put into this larger cultural moment and movement.
And what does that look like, that gifting in practice?
It looks like volunteerism. It looks like theme camps who come across the country or across the world to provide a creative, unexpected, surprising experience to passersby. It looks like artists who plan all year round on a project that will be placed in the middle of the desert on a scale that's almost unimaginable. It looks like the world famous vehicles and art cars that you see in videos and in photographs, where people come together and rally around an idea and a vision and make the impossible possible. I think gifting takes all these different forms.
This is so inspiring. I mean, out in the quote business world, we talk a lot about the kinds of gift that feedback is. And, I think people always look at this slightly cynically, as do I, because feedback isn't always handled well. But, we do talk about when it's done well, it's like a gift to say, here's something that I see that you don't see. Here's something I have that you don't have. And I kind of love that that offer is part of the culture of the organization.
Yeah, I love that it was identified early on by our founder, Larry Harvey, as one of the driving forces of the community. These 10 principles that I've referenced were written down as a reflection of what was happening in the community rather than as a prescription for what it needed to look like. And so that gifting ethic, those values are strong. And I like that you brought the idea of feedback into the conversation, because when I first became acquainted with this concept and with the reality of feedback, it was a bit of a harsh learning curve. And I do feel so grateful that our organization creates a culture of feedback. It's part of training that every single new staff member receives. And once I learned how to give and receive feedback in an open-hearted way, I think it can be transformative.
So tell me, how do you learn to give feedback in your organization?
In our organization, there is a shared expectation that feedback will be received uninterrupted, with an open mind, without defensiveness, and in a way that is timely to whatever the feedback is related to, and that there can be a real conversation had that can create a better outcome.
I love everything you said, but two things in particular really mesh nicely with what I've learned in the business world. One is it has to be a conversation. It's not one person telling a second person stuff. It's two people talking about two different experiences of whatever situation is being referenced and sorting out, how did we get there? And is it the way we wanted it to be? And could we do it better? If so, how? And so when I think about feedback, I always describe it as the only reason to have a feedback conversation is to learn together about how to work better together.
I think that's a great description. And that's what I've learned as well, and try to nurture that in my department and our whole organization. And I attended a leadership retreat years and years ago and took some of the things I learned at that retreat back to my staff and invited feedback, and learned that for different power dynamics, especially, the invitation is almost the most important thing. And so that's a real intention that I set.
And so you request specific feedback from the folks that report to you, or from more than just that?
Yes, more than just that. I think it goes in all directions, but certainly people who report directly to me, I make sure that there's an open invitation and it's a frequent invitation, so that if there's something that is of concern, that we can address it in the moment and comfortably rather than letting it build.
That's so powerful. And so how does it work in the organization? Do people take time to get used to this way of exchanging feedback? Or how was it for you when you first learned it?
I had to learn the language of feedback. So I think one of the biggest lessons in my leadership journey is I needed to learn that things aren't personal. Some things are personal, but oftentimes it's more important to take the opportunity to self-reflect and improve than it is to blame. And so really what we try to do is create consistency around being able to give and receive feedback within Birmingham.
Yeah, I think that's probably helped. I have to imagine that helps quite a lot in cultivating that culture of collaboration and gift giving and respect for all the different perspectives.
I think you're right. When it's prevalent in an organization that or opportunity exists and that expectation exists, it kind of takes the fear away. And it can bring the anxiety down, especially for people who are not accustomed to having that process.
Yeah, and especially working up the, quote, hierarchical chain. Although my guess is it's not a terribly hierarchical organization. Am I right about that?
There is a necessary hierarchy and reporting structure. But what I think is special about Burning Man is the idea that everyone's perspective and experience are valuable. And for me, that needs to be brought into decision making and strategic goals, because I've learned that everyone's experience can be valuable in moments that are unexpected. So even though there is a reporting structure and a hierarchy, especially when we're thinking about public safety and the way that our team has to be responding to different types of incidents or planning for public health and safety, there's necessarily a hierarchy. But I think that if you were to pop into our meetings and the way we do business, it might look a little different than some corporations and companies and nonprofit organizations.
I would imagine. So I want to take a step back into the specifics of your current role, because you work with such a broad array of stakeholders, from, like you said, federal and state agencies to tribal communities, public safety and communications and all kinds of transportation issues and environmental issues. What have you learned about building trust and navigating competing interests that you could share? The issue that you grapple with, all these diverse stakeholders, most leaders have many stakeholders, even if they don't think about it. But you have to think about it all the time. And so how do you think about it? And then what have you learned about how to build trust and navigate the competing interests of these stakeholder groups?
One of the most important things is that trust takes time. And trust is built with intention. And trust comes from following through and delivering on your word. I think trust goes hand in hand with integrity. It's important, especially for our department and for my organization, because it can be so easy to dismiss Burning Man as something that is more casual or less planned. And so the job of showing up and meeting an agency or an organization or a person where they are is so important. So I think that is also something that has become very clear over the years that needs to be a part of the government relations aspect and probably other aspects as well. I think in my role and in my department, when you work with government agencies and elected officials, people can cycle through those roles. There are always new stakeholders at the table. And that's another piece that I've seen so much through the years is you need to have some patience and understanding for people getting up to speed and be ready to provide the background and context that's going to be important to them as they come into these higher level meetings and negotiations and agreements. We have an annual cooperators meeting where the different high-level representatives from our agencies and our operations departments come together to review our operational priorities and to learn who's in what position so that if something were to go wrong, our contingency planning is strong and our communications are in place. And so that is part of what I've seen in this role that's so important around working and building trust.
Mm-hmm. So when you're meetings, I'd almost describe it as you're kind of onboarding these new folks that rotate through the governmental positions, onboarding them into the context and issues and history of the relationship.
That's such a good way to put it, Sharon. Yeah. But go ahead. You were going to.
Well, I was just going to say one of my earliest podcast guests was a friend of mine named Joel Jewett, who is an executive at a company called LiveRamp. And I remember him saying his role is kind of magical business development, like helping create partnerships. And one of the things he said in that episode was, I always like to start with, kind of like, you are here. Like, this is where we all are at this moment today, to ground everybody in the current context. And it sounds like very similar to what you're describing as you start these meetings.
What I love about the idea of you are here is that if you bring 10 people out into a meeting, they would probably put the X in a different spot. So the idea of grounding everyone in the same moment in the same place is so important. I really like the way that he put that. I feel that is a big part of my job, and conveying the importance of what we're doing or why it matters in that context. And especially the background and history. The leadership at Burning Man, many of us have been in our positions for 10 years or 20 years or more. And so the history that we have is important to be able to share the reasons for why decisions have been made or systems are in place or protocols have been built. And so you're so right about that being an important part of the work.
So just thinking about what advice would you give to folks in other kinds of business contexts whose jobs require bringing a lot of diverse stakeholder groups together to align around a decision or to implement a decision made by others.
What's been valuable to me and what continues to work is to have a good grasp of the goals. And those can be different for different people. And so I think the idea of aligning purpose and roles and outcomes is so important. And that can take quite a bit of patience and preparation. But with the right touch and with good facilitation, that really works. Now, not to say that it's not fraught, because there are times when the goals of different organizations or entities or agencies are not going to align. And in that case, that is when there needs to be a little give and take and some concessions. And as you know, oftentimes in negotiations, if everyone leaves a little unhappy, that might have worked out well. But it's really quite a joy when that alignment can be having everyone go in the same direction. So I have learned that it can be complicated, it can be difficult, but I would still give the advice of being, prepared and flexible and patient. And I think knowing when to steer in the direction of decision making. You don't want to stay in the conversation zone too long.
So patience, you've mentioned several times, and time. And so let's say for this year's Burning Man event, when did you begin your government negotiations? When did you start the work to build the aligned view for this year?
The day after last year's event.
So you literally start the next day. You must take a break. Don't you take a break first?
Yeah, it's very much year-round, because what happens out at the event site is we learn and we will debrief and we will make a sort of list or a vision of what might be able to be improved for the following year. And because Burning Man's operations are so complex and because it's such a heavy lift, yes, we do take a little bit of a break, but those preparations do begin quite immediately. And in fact, sometimes are 2 years in planning. So yeah, it's really an incredible process to be a part of. And that planning, it never gets boring. And I imagine that the break that we do have is good for everyone. And I know that in the earlier years of Burning Man, there was a more significant downtime. But now that we're more of a global nonprofit with over 90 different events around the world, there's not too much of a break in between the end of the event and the planning for the next year.
I'm so sorry. 90 events a year?
Yes.
Okay, so besides this one big one, what else are all these events?
These events are regionally produced, regionally visioned and managed by the broader Burning Man community. And so they take place in different countries around the world and different states around the United States. And they each have their own flavor. They are true to Burning Man's principles, but they look different and feel different and are held at different times a year. And some of the largest ones take place in South Africa and Austin, Texas. And then there are smaller ones that are only several hundred people. So that kind of planning that we do to support those individuals and those groups that are leading those events, that's year round.
And so some group of folks decide they want to host one somewhere. And do they reach out to you for help? And you're like, okay, my team can help you with these things?
There's a close partnership between those regional events and our global and regional events teams dedicated to supporting the different events. And they work to ensure that there is a level of support, but also a level of freedom to do what's needed and wanted in the different areas of the world. So, part of our mission as a nonprofit is to advance a more creative, connected, and thriving society. And this is part of that work, is to have these sparks around the world and to see what comes from that creativity in those different areas.
It sounds such an appealing purpose and mission. I'm just thinking about the day-to-day operational lift that's required. And just thinking about all these communities of stakeholders that you've worked with and all these complex negotiations that you're overseeing, how do you, Marnee, stay grounded? And how do you keep your leadership focused in such a high-stakes environment?
I stay grounded because of the people I work with and our shared sense of purpose and the playfulness that we are able to have in our job. That keeps me grounded. I think I stay grounded in the gravity of our responsibility of making sure that the experience that people have at a Burning Man is fun and celebratory, but also safe and well planned. It's easy to stay grounded when your team is amazing and you love your work. And I will tell you that working with the government definitely keeps you grounded because they keep it real.
They keep it real how?
Well, there are such strict requirements and stipulations and deadlines and timelines. And so, in order to meet those, we have to have excellent systems in place. And so we do. We have exemplary operating procedures and protocols and operations plans behind the scenes. So that detailed work is so important. I often find it fun to let people know that, if it weren't for spreadsheets, there would be no Burning Man.
I think this is not what most people think about.
I know.
But you earlier said that there's also a pretty substantial tech group. So I'm guessing that you're finding ways, all of you, to leverage technological advances.
I think Burning Man's been at a leading edge in many, many ways. I know we were one of the first organizations I was aware of to bring in some of the companies that you would be familiar with to help our operating systems behind the scenes. But, even I think back to 2020 and 2021 during the pandemic when we had to cancel our event. And what we saw instead were 8 or 9 different groups that created these online worlds that mimicked Black Rock City that were available to explore and be a part of, that connected this global community across the span of this pandemic that had us all isolated. And so the technology behind that and also the community behind that just felt so incredible at a time when things were so uncertain.
I think my first introduction to Burning Man was actually through Second Light, which is an online interactive world that some friends of mine were involved in. And they're like, oh, you have to come see this. There's Burning Man in world. And it was, as you described, like kind of mind-blowing scale of creativity. What I think about when I think about the challenges of leadership in a job like yours, I think about how do you balance the urgent with the strategically critical? Because there's got to be trade-offs along the way, not just during the event, but I'm thinking more year-round.
One of the things that we've seen at Burning Man is an abundance of opportunities. And it takes some discipline within the organization to focus on specific goals and programs. And that can be rough because everything is interesting.
Yes.
So it's a good question because we have a certain number of staff, a certain amount of bandwidth, and most of us involved at Burning Man want to excel and create the best possible circumstances and the most spectacular result. And so year-round, we identify goals at the upper levels of the organization for the whole organization. And then there are annual goals for each of the departments that line up with those broader goals. And that has taken some time even to get into that pattern. And I think that has been helpful as we've grown. 150 full-time year-round people, and then all of the volunteers and community globally. It's so important to us. And so we try to expand and at the same time make sure we're not taking on more than we can do exceptionally well. When it comes to the event and urgent priorities, mainly that is responding to anything that could be a risk to either the public or to the organization. We also support our off-site agencies when there is, example, one year there was a wildland fire that blocked the exit road from the event. And so there were, 75,000 people on site, and we have to come together as a leadership team to make sure that our public communications are timely and accurate and that people understand what the situation is while we are behind the scenes working with the responding agencies to provide resources. And so there are things that are urgent that come up that our leadership team addresses. And that includes our emergency services department and the event operations team. It includes government relations and communications. And so there is a group that is specially trained to respond in those moments.
That's really great. So as an organization, Burning Man is known for being creativity and community focused. How do we keep those values front and center within the highly regulated systems that the government mandates?
It can be a clash of culture for sure. I think for some of the representatives that we work with, when they come into contact with Burning Man's culture in Black Rock City, they get it and embrace it and understand that it can coexist with the more serious needs of a government agency. Sometimes that set of values can clash, and that's where really expert relationship building and trust exercises come into play, because we're trying to protect the experience on site for people to be free and do as much as they would like in terms of contributing to this greater experience, while also complying with and respecting the requirements of different agencies.
So, do the local and state laws apply to the playa?
So Black Rock City is located in a national conservation area on federal land managed by the Bureau of Land Management. It's in the jurisdiction of Pershing County, with law enforcement jurisdiction with the Pershing County Sheriff's Office. All laws apply, and sometimes the federal law might be inconsistent with the state law. So in the event itself, there are federal laws and state laws, and there is also a closure order that imposes even more restrictions and requirements. So there is a tension sometimes between the state and federal law, and that is typically worked out amongst the different law enforcement agencies on site.
And so do you or your team sit with them as they're doing this and then disseminate what the decision is? Or how does that get spread through the organization?
Yes, we will learn about anything that is in conflict and what the resolution is, and we will make sure to help those agencies get the word out. One of the things that Burning Man is really good at is communications, and we take that responsibility seriously. We have a newsletter that's called the Jackrabbit Speaks that goes out to, I think, 250,000 people, and we use that, especially prior to the event, to make sure that people are prepared and understanding of what laws are in effect. And one of the most special pieces of content that we produce is called the Survival Guide. And it's a beautiful piece of work designed by Aaron Fishkin that includes the tips and tricks and answers to questions that people need when coming out to this austere desert environment, especially for the first time, to understand what's there and what's not there. Because, Sharon, one of the things that makes Burning Man so special is it's a decommodified space. The only thing that is sold at Burning Man is ice. There's nothing else for sale. There's no food or beverages, or there's not a merch booth. And so the radical self-reliance and communal effort, both sides of that coin, come into play. The expectation is that you'll bring everything you need with you and you'll take it when you leave. And so this kind of information that goes out to people is really important.
Yeah, I imagine that a lot of corporate organizations would like to learn, how did you figure out the right kinds of communication and the right frequency of communication? But we'll leave that for a different conversation. I want to go back to leadership and sort of what it is that you have embraced in yourself along the journey. So our listeners tell us that they really love most when we can talk about kind of what were some of your personal struggles and how did you figure it out? So are there a situation or two you can think of where you had to come to face with the truth in yourself to become a better leader?
Yeah, many, many important moments in my journey. One thing I know about myself is that my Achilles heel is impatience sometimes. And I tend to like a fast pace. And what I have learned is that I need to pause and see any given situation for what it is from the different viewpoints of the people involved. And one of the hard lessons that I had to learn actually was at Burning Man on a day where we have a high level of responsibility, bringing in elected officials and subject matter experts and a delegation of distinguished guests to come and see the city and experience the art and the operations. And the team that does this is called XRT. And I learned after the day that we had done our big tour that I had hurt someone's feelings. And I needed to really go back and think about that moment and have a deeper dive with that person who I really cared about to understand what I had missed. And so that was really important and has stayed with me. And I'm not perfect at it, but I keep it top of mind more and more so that I can avoid that kind of situation, that unintended impact.
So, do you have a mantra or something you remind yourself of or question you ask yourself to kind of help you remember that?
I think I just keep myself reminded in those moments where I am moving quickly and things are moving quickly to pay more attention to the people and that are making it happen and to their experience. And one thing that I tell myself is things are important, but not that important. Like it's the people that are important. So I've learned to do that. And I think too, another lesson that I've learned, and this one was a hard one too, but so valuable, is that intention doesn't always match perception. And so I learned that my intention can be experienced in a different way by the person, receiving information or interacting with me. And so I learned that quite a long time ago from someone who was important to me. And there's a colleague that I work with right now who's our event operations director who I can count on to help me if something like that comes up where I have got a blind spot or if I need some input about something that's going on. So I think those are two experiences that have really shaped my leadership.
And did you proactively ask that colleague to help you with that, or is that something they just naturally lean into?
Well, he and I have been working together for about 11 years. And I think that the way that we operate together and our level of responsibility and the way that we trust each other, we are able to lean into those conversations with each other and be that person for each other. And he's not the only person, but he's the person I've worked with the longest and that I can really count on to bring to me anything I need to see that I'm not seeing. And we can do that with humor. We can do it with gravity, whatever needed. But yeah, I think that's really important to have just surround yourself with people who can see you in that way and that you can be open to being seen in that way.
Yeah, for me, that's really important in the colleagues that I work with, too, that we have enough trust that we can have the most difficult conversations with care for each other. Because we only want the same outcome. We only want it to be as good as it can be, in our case, for the clients, in your case, for the participants.
Yeah, I think, Sharon, what you're saying is so important. I noticed a shift in myself from being more task and goal oriented to people oriented and holding space for both of those sides of that coin. And I think that's where the sweet spot is for me.
I love that you just reflected on that because I was thinking about what you said about the visit and that you had inadvertently hurt someone's feelings. And that was the feedback you got. And I'm thinking, well, a lot of the people that I know who lead in business, if they heard that they hurt somebody's feelings, they'd be like, oh, bummer. I'll say I'm sorry next time I see them and not necessarily take it as something that needed to be, I don't know if repaired is the right word, but revisited. And so I wonder if you could talk more about why you decided that. What was the motivation? And how did you do it in a way that felt appropriate to your role and theirs?
I'll start by sharing a story that a long time ago, I volunteered for an event to sell T-shirts for a 4-hour shift. And I was so excited to go and help out. And I planned my day around it. And I showed up for my shift and they told me I wasn't needed. And it didn't feel good. They didn't make space for me. And I had planned around it and felt a sense of excitement about it. And I have carried that with me. And the volunteerism at Burning Man is so important and so strong that when I found out that I had hurt the feelings of one of our volunteers, someone who I have been working with for years, it mattered to me. And it mattered enough that there's not a part of me that was ready to dismiss it or let it go. I felt that I needed to do two things with that conversation. One was to learn how and why I did that so I could avoid it in the future. And the other is to repair any relationship damage that I might have done. So both of those things were so important to me because I think that for me, the moments where I learn the most can be at risk for glossing over if I don't pay attention.
Well, you're highlighting, at least to me, the importance of being intentional in leadership and noticing and paying attention and reflecting on self. How did I do today as a leader? Was I the leader I wanted to be today? And if not, what happened and what took me off my center? And was that okay? Or do I need to practice something different? So I'm guessing that that's sort of the experience you were having internally.
Yeah, I was having the experience internally of needing to take a look at my leadership in that moment because I was leading this team and thought I was doing fine and in that moment was not. And so I've learned also that I need the reflection of others to help me land that bridge between intention and perception.
100%. Wow. So, what did you learn about yourself and your leadership in that one moment?
Well, I'll tell you, I was reminded because I think that sometimes things that are ingrained in us in our lives can show up time and again. And part of the achievement of leadership is having that be less frequent, those things that hold us back and hold our teams back. And so when I was reminded of this, I appreciated it. And one of the things that I told this person was I was so grateful that we could have an open, honest conversation. And it wasn't earth shattering, but it mattered. And we were able to pick up and keep going in a beautiful direction because we were able to like pause and learn from that. And so overall, I just think that for me and maybe other leaders and listeners is understanding that your pace or understanding or expertise looks different from other people's pace and understanding and expertise, and that it's your job when you're leading people to be aware of that and to lift people up with you.
I love the way you said that. So, what's your current learning edge in your leadership? What are you focused on these days?
I'm focused on crisis communications kind of right now and for the past couple of years, and building into the Burning Man organization more capacity for crisis communications. In 2023, there was a rainstorm on the event site that was world news, and our experience of those days was very different than the media portrayal. And in moments like that, especially with an event that's so well known as Burning Man, there are different levels and responsibilities in the communications. That extends to our staff. It extends to the people who are on playa at that time. It extends to the agencies with responsibilities. It extends to elected officials. And very importantly, it extends to the broader public and to the friends and families of the people on site who are wondering what's going on and maybe being misled by media stories.
And I guess maybe also by coordination with media.
Yes, definitely. And my colleague, who's the director of communications, we were, really in lockstep during that time and knocked it out of the park in some areas, but also learned where we were falling short in others. And so we've been focused on what we can do better. And I've been on a learning journey about how important communications are in times of emergencies and, in our case, incidents that can happen on site. So it's very juicy topic for me, and I've been kind of doing a deep dive and doing that for quite a bit now.
And how do you feel like that's stretching you in your leadership?
What I have found interesting about crisis communications and that world is seeing the bigger picture, and I really enjoy that. I'm a detail person, but I really thrive in looking outward and upward and understanding the impact of good, strong, clear communications and the absence of that, and seeing how that can be either positive or negative.
Yeah.
Certainly, if I think back to 2023 with our site inundated with water and having the event and operations really come to a halt for a period of time, and understanding that in that remote area, cell service is almost non-existent. And so we moved very quickly to provide the ability for people on site to communicate with their friends and family and employers and babysitters and airlines off site. And the statements that we make as an organization are going to be important to inform the public.
It's a good place for me to pivot a little bit. I believe so strongly that so much of our workplace cultures are driven by the language we choose to use. And I was very intentional in naming this podcast To Lead is Human. So I'm curious, what does this mean to you in the context of your leadership?
One aspect is that leading is part of human nature, which means it's as complicated and complex as human nature. It's about the leader and about the people she's leading. Leadership is fraught with pitfalls and has boundless opportunities, just like humans and human relationships.
That's for sure. So looking back, is there some advice you would give to yourself when you first took on this leadership role?
The advice I would give to myself if I were just starting out would be to enjoy the experience as much as the achievements. I think that when I first started out in my career, I was doing important and interesting things, but I think I have at times been more focused on the goals and the tasks and the mission. And what I learned, years and years ago is that there's so much enjoyment in the people. And one of my friends taught me progress over perfection.
A good mantra at almost all times, except maybe brain surgery and nuclear physics. There should probably be some other things as well. So, Marnee, thanks so much for being here. I have so enjoyed hearing stories with you and learning together, and I appreciate you sharing your time, especially during this busy time of your year. I imagine that listeners are going to want to know more about Burning Man, about Black Rock City, about you and your work.
I think a good starting point would be our website. There's a little bio about me that if people are interested in learning about me, you'll learn more about the places that I've worked and the projects that I've done. And I also have a profile on LinkedIn that has some interesting background. I've had a very nonlinear career where I started out as a mathematician and got into environmental issues, and now I'm at Burning Man. And so if any of your listeners have also had an unusual career trajectory, they might identify well with that.
I am sure they will, and for all the right reasons. So I'm so grateful that you came on the show today.
Thank you, Sharon. It has been an honor and a privilege to be on your show.
Stay with me for a few minutes, and I'll share some takeaways from our conversation, as well as a few coaching tips. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Marnee Benson, Director of Government Affairs at the Burning Man Project, as much as I did. Let me share what really stood out to me, and then I'll translate those lessons into coaching tips you can put into practice today if you'd like. First, stakeholder engagement is so critical to Marnee and her team. At its core, Marnee's team makes Burning Man possible every year. That means they line up permits with the Bureau of Land Management, the FAA, multiple sheriff's offices, tribal police, state health agencies, all of which have different rules, priorities, and sometimes conflicting agendas. And often the players change every year. So Marnee and her team have to re-earn trust, provide context, and prove their reliability afresh every single year. Trust in their world isn't about charisma. It's about patience, follow-through, and showing people that Burning Man delivers on its promises. In Marnee's words, trust is built with intention, and trust comes from following through and delivering on your word. So if you want to improve the way you handle your stakeholder engagement with the kind of integrity, patience, and trust building that Marnee uses, try this. First, meet any new stakeholder early and don't dive straight into a conversation about tasks. Take a little time to ask about their needs and understand their perspectives. And second, keep a simple log of commitments that you make. Share it openly and update it often. Nothing builds credibility faster than people seeing you do what you said you'd do. The second takeaway is about inclusion and invitation. Marnee takes one of Burning Man's cultural principles. They call it radical inclusion, and she applies it to the work that her team does in government affairs. Instead of seeing regulators as obstacles to overcome, she sees them as partners to invite in. Even skeptical voices get a seat at the table, because inclusion, while it can be messy, is how you create alignment that can last. Marnee doesn't pretend it's easy. She knows agencies can be rigid, even hostile, but her stance and the stance of her team is invite them anyway, because an invitation signals respect, and respect builds trust. She says, one of the guiding principles at Burning Man is radical inclusion, an invitation for people to be involved. And she likes to carry that philosophy all the way through into the work they do in governmental affairs. So take a moment and think about how you treat obstacles or skeptics, whether they're inside or outside your organization. Do you dismiss them? Do you resist them? Or do you invest in building respect and trust? Marnee's move, and my suggestion for you, is to lean in, spend the time, have the conversation, build the relationship, and turn skepticism into alignment. You might be surprised at the collaboration opportunities that arise. The third point, and maybe the point that Marnee had the most passion about, was about feedback being critically important and openly inviting people to provide you, the leader, with feedback. It turns out at Burning Man, feedback isn't optional at all. It's baked into onboarding training for every staff member, it's expected in practice, and it's modeled at every level. Marnee did admit that she had to learn how to receive feedback without that natural defensiveness that so much of us feel. It's natural and human. But now what she does, she makes it a habit to ask. She asks her team members, and she asks her peers, and she asks her bosses. Her point? Feedback doesn't happen because people feel brave. It happens because leaders make it safe. And in particular, she talks about receiving feedback and giving it in an open-hearted way. Something to think about. So my coaching tip for you here is to create a feedback ritual. Once a quarter, go ask around and find out, what's one thing I could change or do differently that would make your work with me easier or more effective? When you ask people regularly, they will stop wondering if you really want to know and if you mean it. They'll know you do because they'll see you adapting to the feedback. The fourth key takeaway, and I think one of the most human moments in our conversation, was when Marnee described unintentionally hurting longtime volunteers' feelings. Repairing relationships and owning your impact are critical moves, even more so for senior executives than anyone else. You can hear in Marnee's voice how much it still matters to her. It wasn't a headline failure. It was a subtle moment. And that's exactly why it's worth my calling it out for you. Many leaders would just wave something like that off, but not Marnee. She slowed down and sat with her own discomfort, tried to figure out what caused her to react as she did, and then she had the hard conversation. For her, leadership includes not just delivering outcomes, but repairing when your impact doesn't match your intention. She described needing to do two things: learning how and why she took the action or said the things that she did so she could avoid it in the future, and to repair any relationship damage she might have caused. So my coaching tip for you here is, don't underestimate those small moments. When you realize you've misstepped, address it quickly. I see how my action impacted you, and here's what I'll change. Those moments of repair build more credibility than pretending nothing happened, and they show people that relationships matter to you as much as results. Lastly, Marnee talks about the critical importance of hierarchy. So it's really interesting. Marnee was very clear that Burning Man requires hierarchy, but of course its reputation is as little more than controlled chaos. So with 70,000 people in the desert, someone has to figure out how safety protocols run, who's managing communications, who coordinates emergency services, and here's the nuance that Marnee pointed out. For her, hierarchy is about who has authority for the action we need to take right now. It's not about title, it's not about tenure, it's not even about subject matter expertise always. It means that when a ranger or a medic says, "Stop, this is unsafe," their word carries. Everyone defers to the role, not the rank. And then outside of such situations, the culture flips back, and all the voices are welcome in generating ideas, shaping strategy, and making some of the decisions that make Burning Man what it is every year. She says there's a necessary hierarchy, but what she finds special is their closely held idea that everyone's perspective and experience are valuable, and we can all learn from each person. So in your own organization, be explicit about who has authority for which actions, regardless of title. For example, you might say, in a client escalation, this account lead has the call. In a security incident, IT runs point. Creating this kind of clarity prevents paralysis, keeps execution crisp, and leaves plenty of space for broad input when it's time to set direction. In closing, what strikes me most about Marnee's leadership is that none of it is flashy. It's the daily disciplines of a leader. Invite people in, listen with curiosity and humility, repair when you slip up, honor all the voices, and keep demonstrating that you will do what you say, that you can be trusted. That's how a temporary city of 70,000 people not only gets built in the middle of nowhere in the Nevada desert, but disappears without a trace afterwards, year after year. And it's how any executive team can build credibility, trust, and alignment that lasts. Because as it turns out, leading really is human. And it's the human parts of leadership that hold organizations together and help them move forward.